morning and welcome to Rizal News Desk. This is Terence Fernila.
And this is Carl Villar, and today we will feature regarding the other significant writings of Dr. Rizal. There is no time to waste. Right now, right here, we provide news with no bias and we provide news with articulation.
Let us now proceed with the first headline. Rizal Annotation to Morga Sucesos de las Islas, Filipinas that provides the early history of the Philippines at the time of pre-Spanish history. For more details, let us call Joyce Dalida and Anilu Garcia.
This is Channels Television's breaking news.
Thank you, Terence. The Rizal's annotation to Morga Sucesos de las Islas, Filipinas. Not only was Governor Antonio de Morga the first to compose a Philippine history, but was also the first to publish it. This claim relates to the topic's treatment by your author, which was succinct and specific. Dr. Morga seems to be referring to the Roman Catholic faith, which he would protect in its purity in the Philippines with fire and sword. However, in other countries, particularly in Flanders, these methods failed to preserve the church's status quo, uphold its hegemony, or even hold its people. Although Spanish ships did discover and conquer great kingdoms in far-off regions of the world, we can also include Portuguese, Italians, French, Greeks, Africans, and Polynesians among the other nationalities that embarked abroad those ships. Even though they were led by Spanish fleets, the expeditions led by Columbus and Magellan, one a Genoese Italian and the other a Portuguese, as well as those that followed them, were crewed by people of many different nationalities, including African, Americans, Moluccans, and even people from the Philippines and the Mariana Islands. The 8th chapter of the Morga history demonstrates how far advanced the pre-Spanish Filipino culture was in terms of the responsibilities of life at that time. Through agreements, friendship, treaties, and reciprocal alliances, Spain gained authority and sovereignty over the islands. Some historians believe that Magellan died on Mactan, where the Legazpi warriors fought under the command of King Tupas of Cebu. Morga demonstrates that the early Filipinos possessed an army and navy as well as artillery and other weapons of war. Their treasured crises and compilance, some of which are finely damascened and laudable for their magnificent temper, their helmets and mail coats, example of which can be found in numerous European museums, and it demonstrates their significant achievement in this field. Morga claimed that the Spaniards brought war to the gates of the Filipinos, which contrasts sharply with a phrase later historians used to describe how Spain took control of a province and keep it peaceful. Maybe to make peace meant the same thing as to stir up conflict, and it will be further continued by Anilu Garcia.
Thank you, Joyce. Cebu was initially known as the town of San Miguel, as Morga referred to it as the city of the most holy name of Jesus, the revered Italian chronicler of Magellan's expedition. The Chevalier Picapeta gave the Cebuano queen the image of the Holy Child of Cebu, which many religious writers claim was transported to Cebu by angels. One of the southern islands, Tendaya, which is now maybe Leyte, was given the name Philippines by the expedition of Villalobos, which was between Magellan's and Legazpi's. Later, this name was extended to the entire archipelago. The Spaniards arrived in Manila. Raha Suliman was the youthful monarch, or Rahang Mura, as opposed to the elderly king, or Rahang Matanda. These figures have been misidentified by historians. The ramparts of the indigenous fort near the Pasig River mouth, which Morga describes as having brass lantakas and larger caliber cannon, were reinforced with strong hardwood posts similar to those the Tagalogs used for their homes and named harigis or haligi. Evidently, up to this point, Morga has confused the arrival of Legazpi on the Pacific with the attack of Goiti and Salcedo. Other historians assert that Manila was burned in 1570, along with a significant cannon production facility. Goiti did not conquer the city. Instead, he withdrew to Cavite and afterwards to Panay, casting doubt on his claimed success. The Spaniards arrived after the sun's course, therefore they were around 16 hours later than Europe on the day of the date. This situation persisted until December 31st, 1844, when the authorities decided to remove it from the calendar for that year as part of a special agreement. The Spaniards retained the native name for the new capital of the archipelago, a little change. However, for the Tagalogs called their city Maynila. The southern island, the Visayas, were also called the land of the painted people, or pintados in Spanish, because the natives had their bodies decorated with tracing made with fire, somewhat like tattooing. Morga makes no mention for the Cebuans' assistance in the Spanish invasion of Manila, which led to their long-standing exemption from paying tribute. The Tagalogs had called their city Maynila. Therefore, the Spaniards kept the original name for the new capital of the archipelago with a few modifications. Back to you, Carl.
Thank you for that, Miss Dalida and Miss Lucia. Here is the second set of headline on Rizal's annotation to Morgan's Sucesos de las Islas, Filipinas. For further information, here is Miss Libuen and Miss Pablo.
Thank you, Carl. In the expedition which followed the Chinese corsair Lima Hong after his unsuccessful attack upon Manila, had in it 1,500 friendly Indians from Cebu, Bohol, Leyte, and Panay. Former Rahal Kandula of Tondo, with his sons and his kinsmen, went to with 200 more Visayans, and they were joined by other Filipinos in Pangasinan. In the fruitless expedition against the Portuguese in the island of Ternate, in the Molucca group was abandoned because of the prevalence of beriberi among the troops. One wonders why the Philippines could have a representative then but may not have one now. Manila was guarded against further damage such as was suffered from Limahong by the construction of a massive stone wall around it. The governor, in like manner, also fortified the point at the entrance to the river where had been an ancient native fort of wood. For Governor Dasmariñas' expedition to conquer Ternate in the Molucca group, 2 Jesuits there gave secret information. In his 200 ships, besides 900 Spaniards, there must have been Filipinos, for one chronicler speaks of Indians who lost their lives. It was the custom then always to have 1,000 or more native bowmen, and besides the crew were almost all Filipinos. There was no law that required them to row, and they had come to Manila to engage in commerce, or to work in trades, or to follow professions. The Filipinos have been much more long-suffering than the Chinese since, in spite of having had to row on more than one occasion, they never mutinied.
He writes that 9/10 of the natives were infidels, and that even now there are so many settlements of non-Christians, it takes away much of the prestige of that religious zeal, which grows lethargic in cities. The Buahayans had to defend their homes against a powerful invader, many of whom were invulnerable so far as rude Indians were concerned. Yet these same Indians were defenseless against the balls from their muskets. By the Jesuits' line of reasoning, the heroic Spanish peasantry in the war for independence would have been a people even more treacherous. The Japanese were not in error when they suspected the Spanish and Portuguese religious propaganda to have political motives back of the missionary activities. Witness the Moluccas, where Spanish missionaries served as spies, Cambodia, which it was sought to conquer under the cloak of converting. What would Japan have been now had not its emperors uprooted Catholicism, the raid by Datu Sali and Silonga of Mindanao in 1599 with 50 sailing vessels and 3,000 warriors against the capital of Panay is the first act of piracy recorded in Philippine history. These Moro piracies continued for more than 2 centuries, during which the indomitable sons of the South made captives and carried fire and sword into Manila Bay.
Thank you for that, Miss Tibuan and Miss Pablo. Next to that is while Japan was preparing to invade Philippines, and will be reported by Miss San Jose and Miss De Guzman.
While Japan was preparing to invade the Philippines, these islands were sending expeditions to Tonkin and Cambodia. Enormous indeed were the benefits which the secret civilization brought to the archipelago have to be in order to counterbalance so heavy a cost. Here would seem to be the origin of the modern Tulasans or Tulasanes, which are also of a religious character. Morga's account of the failure of Governor Pedro de Acuna's expedition against the Moros unhappily still apply for the same conditions yet exist. That peaceful country folk are deprived of the arms and thus made unable to defend themselves against the bandits or Tulasanes, which the government cannot restrain. It is an encouragement to banditry, thus to make easy its getting booty.
Colin Campbell looks at the Filipino ships who went with the Spanish expedition against Ternate in the Moluccas in 1605. They bore themselves bravely, for Argensola writes that no officer, Spaniard or Indian went unscathed. The Cebuanos drew a pattern on the skid before starting into Taguig, the same procedure that the Japanese today follow. Colin says that the ancient Filipinos had minstrels who had memorized songs telling their genealogies and of the deeds ascribed to their deities. According to Gaspar San Agustin, the canon which the pre-Spanish Filipinos cast were as great as those of Malaga. The canon foundry mentioned by Morga, as in the walled city, was probably on the site of one destroyed by fire on the first coming of the Spaniards. Morga's statement that there was not a province or town of the Filipinos that resisted conversion or did not want it may have been true of the civilized natives. But the contrary was the fact among the mountain tribes. We have testimony of several Dominican and Augustinian missionaries that it was impossible to go anywhere to make conversions without other Filipinos along and a guard of soldiers.
Thank you for that, Miss San Jose and Miss De Guzman. Also thanks to the reporters for all the information they provided. You have just heard the latest news around the globe.
Again, this is Rizal News Desk with no bias, news with no exception, delivering nothing but the truth.
This is Tens Frenila,
And Kari Villar,
bringing you the latest news around the globe. Thank you for being with us.